The rebellious proposal. Victoria Hale stood on the rooftop of her father's towering Manhattan penthouse, the glittering city stretching out below her like a sea of restless stars. The summer wind whipped through her long dark hair, carrying with it the faint echo of jazz music from the ballroom inside. Tonight was supposed to be another celebration, another performance where she played the perfect daughter for the cameras, smiling at investors, nodding politely at her father's business partners, and pretending not to feel the invisible chains around her wrists. But Victoria had mastered the art of rebellion. At 24, her name had already become a tabloid favorite. "Heiress gone wild," one headline had screamed after she crashed her Lamborghini in Central Park. "The untamable Hale princess," another declared after she was spotted sneaking into a Brooklyn underground club in torn jeans and leather boots instead of attending her father's charity auction. They called her reckless, spoiled, scandalous. Yet Victoria knew the truth. Every outrageous act was a calculated strike, her only weapon against a life she never chose. Behind every scandal was a woman who wanted nothing more than freedom. Inside the ballroom, her father, Charles Hale, was playing host to a constellation of powerful men. Charles had built his empire in finance, a man whose handshake could move markets, whose approval could make or break fortunes. To him, Victoria wasn't a daughter. She was an asset, a pawn in the Hale legacy. And tonight he had made it clear. Her future was sealed. Her stepmother, Evelyn, glided across the room like an ice sculpture come to life, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers. It was Evelyn who delivered the news earlier that afternoon, her voice laced with sugar and poison. "Your father has arranged everything, darling. You'll be engaged by next month. Think of it as your duty. The merger depends on it." The groom? A 60-year-old real estate mogul with 3 divorces behind him and eyes that roved like a vulture's. Victoria had stared at Evelyn, her green eyes burning with defiance. "I won't be sold like cattle." Evelyn's lips had curved into a cold smile. "Then find another way. But who would marry a girl like you? Who would risk their fortune on a wild creature who doesn't know how to obey?" The words stung, not because they were true, but because the world believed them. Victoria stepped back from the rooftop edge, pulling the leather jacket tighter around her emerald dress. Somewhere deep inside, the voice of her late mother whispered, reminding her of kindness, of courage, of freedom. Catherine Hale had always told her that real strength came not from rebellion, but from staying true to her heart. But Catherine was gone, and rebellion was all Victoria had left. She wasn't afraid of headlines. She wasn't afraid of scandal. What she feared was surrendering to a life that wasn't hers. Across the city, Nathaniel Cross sat in the exclusive Meridian Club, the kind of place where deals were made over a glass of 100-year-old scotch. At 30, he was already a billionaire, the kind of man Wall Street whispered about in awe and fear. Nathan had risen from nothing, a middle-class boy with no connections who had built a tech empire with sheer intelligence and ruthless discipline. But success had hardened him. 3 years ago, the woman he loved, his fiancée, betrayed him by leaking his company's secrets to his rival. Since then, Nathan had stopped believing in love. To him, relationships were transactions, and people were assets or liabilities. He trusted numbers, contracts, and strategy, not emotions. "Come on, Nathan," said Benjamin Hayes, his oldest friend, leaning back in his chair with a grin. "You can't stay a machine forever. Pick any woman in this room and I guarantee she'd say yes. You need a wife, someone to soften your image. Investors like stability, not ice." Nathan sipped his whiskey, his dark eyes sweeping the room. "Love is a weakness, marriage is a contract, nothing more." Benjamin laughed. "That's not cynicism, that's arrogance. Tell you what, since you think you can control everything, let's make it interesting. I bet you can't turn someone completely untamable into the perfect wife in 3 months." Nathan's brow arched. "Anyone?" Benjamin pointed at the television screen mounted on the wall, where Victoria Hale's scandal was plastered across the news. "Heiress caught in midnight race through Central Park." Her striking green eyes stared out of the frame, defiant, untamed, wild. Her, Benjamin said, the rebellious princess of Manhattan. If you can make her into your perfect wife in 3 months, I'll invest $10 million in your next venture. Nathan's gaze lingered on the screen. She was beautiful, yes, but not delicate. She looked like a storm contained in a human body, dangerous and magnetic. And if I fail? He asked calmly. Then you admit you're wrong. Donate $10 million to charity and admit maybe not everything in life can be controlled. Nathan set down his glass. Deal. The next night, fate decided to set its stage. The Metropolitan Museum fundraiser was one of those glittering events where New York's elite pretended to admire art while calculating profits in their heads. Victoria attended only because Evelyn forced her emerald gown hugging her form like a cage. She stood alone in front of a Renaissance painting, staring at a woman in the artwork who looked equally trapped. That was when she felt it. Someone watching her. She turned and met Nathan Cross's gaze. His presence was impossible to ignore. Tall, composed, with eyes so sharp they seemed to dissect her soul. Victoria knew of him, of course, everyone did. The boy genius turned ruthless CEO. Cold, efficient, untouchable. Enjoying the art? He asked, his tone smooth, controlled. It's better than the company, she replied without looking at him, her voice dripping with rebellion. Most men would have walked away, but Nathan stepped closer. I'm Nathan Cross. I know, she replied coolly. Question is, what do you want? Nathan studied her, his expression unreadable. Marriage. The word hit her like a strike of lightning. Victoria blinked, trying to decide if he was joking or insane. Excuse me? Nathan's voice was calm, almost businesslike. A contract. 3 months. You'll be my wife in public, free from your family's plans. In return, you walk away afterward with independence and a settlement that guarantees your freedom. No strings. Victoria's lips curved into a sharp laugh. You expect me to marry a stranger just because you offer it like a business deal? You need an escape, Nathan replied simply. And I need a wife for appearances. We can help each other. Victoria studied him, searching for the catch. He was serious. His face gave nothing away, but his eyes held the weight of someone who always won. Why me? She asked. Nathan's answer was immediate. Because you're the last woman anyone would expect to agree. That night, Victoria lay awake in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling. Her father's contracts for the arranged marriage sat unopened on the dresser. Evelyn's words replayed in her mind, marry Marcus or lose everything. Nathan's offer echoed against them, dangerous and insane, but it was freedom. Her rebellion had always been about running away, about saying no. Maybe, just this once, rebellion meant saying yes. She picked up her phone, staring at Nathan's card. Her hand trembled as she dialed. When his voice answered, calm and certain, she whispered the words that would change everything. I accept your proposal. Nathan leaned back in his chair, a faint smile ghosting his lips. The first move of the game had been played. For him, it was strategy. For her, it was survival. Neither of them knew that the bet would unlock truths. Neither could control. And as the city lights burned outside, 2 strangers stepped into a marriage that was never meant to be real, yet destined to change them both forever. The cold wedding and cracks in the ice. The marriage took place on a gray Thursday morning, far removed from the glitter and spectacle the tabloids expected. No cathedral, no orchestra, no rows of white roses, just the stark chambers of City Hall, where lives were bound by signatures and the bored intonations of a civil judge. For Victoria, it felt less like a wedding, and more like a courtroom trial. She wore a simple ivory dress she had bought on impulse, the fabric soft but unremarkable, a deliberate choice to spite Evelyn's obsession with appearances. Nathan arrived in a navy suit, crisp and precise, his tie knotted with mathematical perfection. His face was unreadable, his posture unshakable, as if he were signing a business merger instead of pledging his life to a stranger. The ceremony lasted no more than 10 minutes. When the judge asked if Nathan took Victoria to be his wife, he answered with the same calm certainty he might use to approve a contract. When the question turned to Victoria, her throat tightened. For one brief heartbeat, she remembered her mother's words about love being a force that could heal even the most broken souls. But that world belonged to another lifetime. This was survival, rebellion disguised as surrender. She lifted her chin, her green eyes blazing with defiance as she said, "I do." There was no kiss to seal the moment. Instead, Nathan extended his hand as if closing a deal. His palm was warm, steady, and yet strangely impersonal. "Congratulations, Mrs. Cross," he said evenly, his voice betraying nothing. Outside City Hall, the chaos exploded. Paparazzi cameras flashed like lightning storms, their shouts ricocheting off the stone steps. "Victoria! Nathan! Was this arranged? Why the secrecy? Is this love or strategy?" Nathan placed his hand lightly on her back, guiding her into the waiting car. "Smile," he murmured, his lips close to her ear. "The cameras are our first battlefield." Victoria forced a smile, her lips curved like a blade, dazzling enough to blind the cameras. But inside, she felt the weight of invisible chains tightening around her wrist. She wondered if she had just traded one prison for another. Nathan's penthouse was unlike anything she had ever seen. Rising above Central Park, it was an architectural masterpiece of steel and glass, where the skyline became a living painting beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Inside, the design was minimalist, almost surgical. Black leather furniture, chrome accents, glass sculptures placed with military precision. It was a space built for efficiency, not comfort. "Your room is down the hall," Nathan said, handing her a small brass key. "I've arranged for clothing in your size. My assistant will coordinate your schedule for public appearances. Our first event as a couple is tomorrow evening at the Vanderbilt charity dinner." Victoria arched an eyebrow, her voice edged with mockery. "Efficient? Do you always treat wives like employees?" Nathan's expression didn't flicker. "This arrangement will work best if we maintain boundaries. I have no interest in your personal affairs, and I assume you feel the same about mine. Publicly, we are a united front. Privately, we are independent." For days, their life together unfolded with the precision of a chess game. Nathan rose at dawn, exercised in silence, and left for the office by 7, returning only when the city was asleep. They attended dinners, galas, and board meetings side by side, performing the roles of a glamorous power couple so flawlessly that magazines hailed them as Manhattan's new royalty. But behind closed doors, they were strangers orbiting in the same house, never colliding, never speaking beyond necessity. Yet Victoria began to notice small cracks in his icy armor. She found receipts tucked into his desk drawers for anonymous donations to children's hospitals and refugee programs. She overheard Mrs. Rodriguez, the housekeeper, telling a delivery boy how Nathan had paid for her husband's medical treatment and her son's college tuition. One evening, wandering sleepless into the kitchen, Victoria found Nathan at the counter, in his rolled-up shirt sleeves, surrounded by scholarship thank-you letters from students whose lives he had quietly changed. "You're up late," she said, her voice breaking the silence. Nathan looked up, startled, his eyes softening for a fleeting second before his mask returned. "Work," he replied curtly, gathering the letters as though they were classified documents. Victoria smiled faintly, leaning against the counter. "You hide it well." His brow furrowed. "Hide what?" "The fact that behind all the ice you might actually have a heart." His hand stilled on the papers. For a moment something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or anger, or a memory he refused to share. Then, like a curtain dropping, it was gone. "Good night, Victoria," he said, brushing past her without another word. But once the cracks appear, they cannot be unseen. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself watching him differently. She noticed the way his gaze softened when he thought no one was looking, the way he listened attentively when someone spoke about real struggles instead of profits. At a gala one night, she caught him quietly slipping a check into the donation box while the cameras were distracted. At another event, she saw him kneel down to reassure a terrified child who had wandered away from her parents. He carried himself like a man carved of stone, but Victoria began to sense the pulse of something warmer buried deep within him. For Nathan, the game was shifting too. He had entered this marriage as a bet, a transaction, a performance to prove his theories about control. But Victoria was nothing like he expected. She was not a spoiled princess clinging to wealth. She was a warrior disguised as a scandal, a woman whose rebellion was born of wounds deeper than the world could see. He noticed the way she lingered at charity events, how she gravitated toward the children, how her eyes shone when she spoke with struggling artists or shelter volunteers. She laughed in a way that disarmed him, a sound that cut through the noise of numbers and strategies. And though he told himself it was irrelevant, that she was a variable to be managed, he couldn't ignore the way his chest tightened when she walked into the room. One rainy evening, Victoria returned from a visit to an art center where she volunteered in secret. Her emerald dress was smudged with paint, her hair damp from the storm. She found Nathan in the living room, buried in reports, his expression unreadable. Without thinking, she dropped her sketchbook onto the table. "Do you ever stop being a machine?" she teased. Nathan glanced at the sketchbook, his eyes catching on a drawing of the city skyline. He picked it up, studying the lines with an unexpected seriousness. "You drew this?" "Yes," she said softly, watching him. "My mother taught me. She believed creating something beautiful was the only way to fight the ugliness in the world." Nathan set the sketchbook down, his gaze lingering on her face. "Tell me about her." The question startled her. For the first time since their marriage, he was asking, not as a businessman, not as a strategist, but as a man who wanted to know. Victoria spoke of her mother for over an hour, of the weekends spent painting, of the way Catherine believed kindness could change even the hardest hearts. Nathan listened in silence, his dark eyes fixed on hers. When she finished, the room felt different, warmer, closer, dangerous in its intimacy. For a moment, Victoria saw not the ruthless CEO, but the boy, who had once dreamed, once loved, once trusted before betrayal turned him cold. But just as quickly, the walls went up again. Nathan stood, his mask firmly in place. "We have an event tomorrow," he said briskly. "Rest well." Yet as he left, Victoria saw the truth in his eyes. The ice was cracking, and cracks, once they spread, cannot be contained. Unmasking the Millionaire. The days turned into weeks, and the performance of Nathan Cross and Victoria Hale as Manhattan's most dazzling couple became a story that fed the city's gossip columns like a never-ending feast. Headlines called them the untamed heiress who finally settled and the billionaire who tamed Manhattan's wildest rose. On the surface, the illusion was flawless. They arrived together at every gala, dazzling under the camera flashes, their synchronized smiles convincing even the sharpest critics. Nathan's arm rested lightly against her back, her hand often looped through his elbow, their chemistry polished until it gleamed. But behind closed doors, life was more complicated. The walls of Nathan's penthouse contained not a romance but an experiment. Two strangers living parallel lives under one roof, each guarding secrets they dared not reveal. For Victoria, the adjustment was suffocating and liberating in equal measure. She was no longer bound by her father's manipulative contracts, no longer under Evelyn's watchful eye. Her rebellion had bought her escape, but now she lived inside a cage of glass and steel with a man who viewed marriage as a transaction. Yet Nathan's world fascinated her in ways she hadn't expected. He was disciplined to the point of obsession, his life built on precision. 5:30 wake-up calls, grueling workouts, perfectly timed meetings, contracts reviewed before dawn. He moved like a soldier trained for battle, his face rarely betraying anything more than focus. But here and there, she caught glimpses of the human beneath the armor, the donation receipts she had found, the tender tone she overheard when he arranged medical care for Mrs. Chen's grandson, the way his eyes softened when she spoke of her mother. These fragments haunted her. They made her wonder what he was, hiding behind the walls of steel. For Nathan, the experiment was not going according to plan. When he had agreed to Benjamin's bet, he had viewed it as a challenge, another equation to solve. another proof of his ability to bend the world to his will. But Victoria Hale was unlike any problem he had faced. He had expected entitlement, vanity, frivolity. Instead, he found a woman who hid her true self beneath a mask of rebellion. A woman who spent her afternoons helping children paint murals in run-down community centers, who donated anonymously to shelters, who argued with fire in her eyes when she saw injustice at galas. She was unpredictable, and unpredictability unnerved him. She asked questions he did not want to answer, laughed at him when he was too serious, and looked at him with eyes that made him feel exposed. For a man who thrived on control, she was chaos, and yet, he found himself drawn to her chaos more than he wanted to admit. The turning point came one evening when Victoria returned from volunteering at a youth shelter. She entered the penthouse, expecting silence, but instead heard the deep, rich tones of a piano drifting through the air. Following the sound, she found Nathan seated at a glossy black grand piano near the window, his fingers moving across the keys with surprising grace. The melody was haunting, filled with longing and loss, so unlike the cold efficiency he projected to the world. She stood there, hidden in the shadows, unable to look away. When the last note faded, Nathan's shoulders slumped slightly, as though the music had drained the strength from him. "I didn't know you played," she said softly. He turned, startled, the mask slamming back into place. "It's nothing, a habit from years ago." She stepped closer, her eyes fixed on him. "That wasn't nothing, that was beautiful. Why do you hide it?" He closed the piano lid with a quiet thud. "Because beauty is useless in my world. It doesn't win contracts or stop betrayals." Her heart ached at the bitterness in his tone. "Maybe not," she replied gently. "But it keeps you alive. It reminds you you're more than a machine." For a moment his eyes locked on hers, something unspoken passing between them. It was the first time she had seen him truly vulnerable, stripped of armor. But then, as always, he pulled away. "Don't romanticize me, Victoria. You'll only be disappointed." He left the room, but she remained by the piano, tracing her fingers over the keys he had touched. It was then she realized Nathan Cross was not heartless. He was wounded. And wounds had stories. The following week, an opportunity to see more of those hidden stories arrived. They were invited to a weekend retreat hosted by one of Nathan's investors, a gathering of CEOs, politicians, and celebrities at a sprawling estate in the Hamptons. For Victoria, it was a chance to breathe outside the suffocating penthouse, even if only temporarily. For Nathan, it was a battlefield. Every handshake a negotiation, every smile a calculation. They arrived as the perfect couple, Victoria's emerald gown glistening under the sunset, Nathan's presence commanding the room. Yet away from the public gaze, Victoria saw things others did not. She noticed how Nathan's jaw tightened when someone mentioned betrayal. She caught him staring at the horizon, lost in thought when he believed no one was watching. On the second night, unable to sleep, Victoria wandered into the library of the estate. She found Nathan there, seated alone with a glass of scotch, his tie loosened, the mask slipping from his face. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He didn't startle. He simply gestured for her to sit. For a long time they sat in silence, the fire crackling between them. Then, unexpectedly, Nathan spoke. "Do you know why I don't believe in love?" His voice was low, almost broken. She shook her head, waiting. He told her about Juliet Morrison, the woman he had once loved, the woman who had sold his company's secrets, leaving him with nothing but ashes and suspicion. He spoke without embellishment, each word edged with pain. "I trusted her more than anyone, and she taught me the cost of trust. Since then, I don't gamble with hearts. I gamble with numbers. Numbers don't lie." Victoria listened, her chest tightening with empathy. "Not everyone is Juliet," she whispered. His eyes met hers, dark and haunted. "Everyone has a price. That's what I've learned." She leaned closer, her voice firm. "Then maybe you've been looking at the wrong people." For a heartbeat, it felt as though the world had narrowed to just the two of them, firelight flickering across their faces, secrets binding them closer than any contract. Nathan's hand moved as if to reach for hers, but at the last second he withdrew, retreating into the safety of his walls. When they returned to Manhattan, something between them had shifted. Their public performances were the same, but in private, the air crackled with unspoken tension. Nathan began to ask about her day, not out of politeness, but genuine curiosity. He noticed the paint stains on her fingers, the way her eyes lit when she spoke of art. In return, Victoria found herself watching him with new eyes, seeing the man beneath the armor, the wounded soul beneath the billionaire. Their silences became less hostile, more contemplative, filled with the possibility of something unspoken. But fate has a way of testing fragile beginnings. One evening, Victoria attended an art exhibition with a few friends from her charity circle. As she admired a painting, she overheard whispers from two women nearby. "Poor girl. Doesn't she know? He only married her as part of a bet. Nathan, Cross and Benjamin Hayes, it's all over the club. 3 months and he'll discard her like the others." The words slammed into her like a physical blow. For a moment, the room spun. She forced herself to remain composed, but inside, her heart pounded with rage and fear. Could it be true? Was she nothing more than a wager? When she returned home that night, she found Nathan in his office, reviewing contracts as always. She stood in the doorway, her voice trembling but fierce. "Tell me something, Nathan. Was this us just a bet?" He looked up, his eyes narrowing. For once, the man who always had an answer seemed caught off guard. Silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. His jaw tightened, his lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. That silence was louder than any confession. Victoria's chest constricted, her rebellion twisting into anguish. She had agreed to this marriage to escape one prison. Had she unknowingly stepped into another trap? With tears stinging her eyes, she turned and walked away, slamming the door behind her. Nathan sat there in the silence, his hands clenched into fists. For the first time in years, he had no strategy, no calculation, no control. He had only the echo of her question, a truth he could no longer deny. The bet had begun as a game, but somewhere along the way, she had become more than a wager. She had become the one person who could unravel him completely, and now she knew enough to walk away. Shattered trust and hidden truths, Victoria didn't sleep that night. She wandered the empty halls of Nathan's penthouse like a ghost, her bare feet silent against the marble floors, her heart heavy with the weight of the whispers she had heard. A bet, a game, a cruel wager between men who measured worth not by love or respect but by control and victory. She replayed the scene in the gallery, the smirk on the lips of the women gossiping, their words sharp as glass. 3 months, and he'll discard her like the others. Had she truly been so blind? She had known Nathan was cold, transactional, detached. She had known their marriage had started as an arrangement, a lifeline thrown to her rebellion. But somewhere along the way, she had begun to see him differently. She had seen the man who played the piano when no one was looking, the man who quietly paid for strangers' medical care, the man whose eyes softened when she spoke of her mother. She had allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was something real between them. And now she felt like a fool. When dawn broke, she was still awake, staring out at the skyline from the balcony. Nathan found her there, his usual polished demeanor cracked with fatigue. He approached cautiously as if she were a wild creature ready to flee. "Victoria," he said quietly, his voice low, almost hesitant. "We need to talk." She didn't turn to face him. Her arms were folded, her jaw tight. "Do we? Or should I just wait for the 3 months to end so you can collect your winnings?" The words struck like venom. Nathan flinched, an almost imperceptible reaction, but one she caught. "It's not what you think," he began, but she cut him off with a sharp laugh, bitter and hollow. "Isn't it? You and your friend Benjamin, laughing about how you could turn the wild heiress into the perfect wife. Tell me, Nathan, Did I make a good project? Was I rebellious enough to make it worth your while? His hands clenched into fists at his sides, the mask of control cracking. Yes, he admitted, his voice strained. It started as a bet, I won't lie about that, but it stopped being one a long time ago. Victoria spun to face him, her green eyes blazing with fury and pain. Stopped being one? Do you think that makes it better? You used me, Nathan. You treated my life like a game, my pain like entertainment. She took a step closer, her voice trembling but fierce. Do you know what it's like to spend your entire life being someone else's pawn? My father, my stepmother, society. They all used me, and I thought you were different, but you're just another man who decided I was a prize to be won. Her words cut deeper than any blade because they were true. Nathan, who prided himself on control, on logic, on always knowing the right move, found himself speechless. He reached out almost instinctively, but she stepped back as though his touch would burn her. Don't, she whispered, her voice breaking. Don't you dare. Then she turned and walked away, her footsteps echoing down the hall, leaving him standing alone on the balcony with the city sprawling beneath him, his empire vast and glittering, and utterly hollow. In the days that followed, their home became a battlefield of silence. Victoria avoided him whenever possible, retreating into her art, her charities, her late-night walks through the city. Nathan threw himself into work with even greater intensity, staying later at the office, surrounding himself with contracts and numbers because they could not accuse him, could not bleed him with disappointment. But even as he buried himself in business, he couldn't escape her voice, her eyes, the raw truth she had hurled at him. For the first time in years, he doubted himself, not his strategies, not his empire, but his own heart. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, Nathan sought her out. He found her in the guest room she had claimed for herself, sitting cross-legged on the floor surrounded by sketches and paints. She looked up as he entered, her face unreadable. He stood there for a long moment, unsure of how to begin. The great Nathan Cross, master of negotiations, conqueror of markets, reduced to a man struggling for words. I never meant to hurt you, he said finally, his voice low. I thought I could control this like everything else in my life, but I was wrong. You were never a project, Victoria. You became something I didn't expect. Something I can't explain. She set down her pencil, studying him with wary eyes. Do you even know how to be honest with yourself, Nathan? Or is everything just another performance, another strategy? His jaw tightened. I don't know. I only know that when I'm with you, I feel... He stopped, the words choking in his throat. Vulnerability was foreign to him, an enemy he didn't know how to fight. Victoria shook her head, her voice cold. You feel? Forgive me if I don't believe that anymore. Nathan left, his chest heavy with frustration and longing. He had built empires, crushed competitors, survived betrayal, but the idea of losing, Victoria terrified him more than any of it. For the first time, he realized that no amount of money or power could buy back trust once it was broken. Meanwhile, whispers about their marriage began to spread beyond the social circles. Paparazzi speculated about the distance between them. Tabloids hinted at cracks in the fairy tale. Evelyn, ever the vulture, called Victoria one afternoon with icy satisfaction. I warned you, darling. Men like Nathan don't change. You should have listened. But instead of breaking her further, Evelyn's words ignited a spark of defiance in Victoria's chest. She would not let Evelyn, her father, or even Nathan define her story. If this marriage had been born out of a bet, then she would decide how it ended, not them. Determined to reclaim herself, Victoria threw her energy into her charity work with more passion than ever before. She organized a massive fundraiser for homeless youth, pouring her creativity into the event, designing it as both an art exhibition and a gala. The night of the event, she stood in the center of the gallery, surrounded by her own sketches displayed alongside pieces by the children she supported. Guests murmured in admiration, impressed by both the artistry and the cause. For the first time, Victoria felt truly alive, Not as an heiress, not as a wife, but as herself. Nathan arrived late, his presence drawing immediate attention. He wore his usual tailored suit, his mask firmly in place. But when he saw Victoria, standing beneath the spotlight, radiant in a gown that shimmered like starlight, something inside him cracked. He watched as she spoke passionately about giving children hope, as she laughed with donors, as she moved with grace and fire. She wasn't the rebellious heiress the tabloids mocked, nor the pawn her family tried to control. She was a leader, a creator, a force of her own. And for the first time, Nathan realized the full weight of what he stood to lose. After the speeches ended, he found her on the balcony, the city lights painting her in gold. "Victoria," he said softly. She turned, her expression wary. "What do you want, Nathan?" He hesitated, then took a step closer. "I want to make this right. Not for the bet, not for appearances, but for us. I can't change how it started, but I can choose how it ends, and I don't want it to end like this." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice was steady. "Words aren't enough. You, of all people, should know that. Prove it. Show me I wasn't just another game to you." Nathan's jaw tightened with determination. For a man who had always lived by numbers and deals, the idea of proving his heart was terrifying. But he knew she was right. This was not a battle he could win with money or contracts. It was a war for trust, for redemption, for something real, and he was willing to fight. But as they stood on that balcony, a new shadow loomed. Across the city, Benjamin Hayes was preparing to collect on the bet, smug in the belief that Nathan had failed. And Evelyn, sensing opportunity, whispered to Victoria's father about annulling the marriage and forcing her back into the contract with Marcus Rothschild. Forces were moving against them, powerful forces that neither Nathan nor Victoria yet saw. Their fragile connection, already tested by lies and wounds, was about to be thrown into a storm far greater than either of them imagined. And when that storm hit, it would demand a choice that could either shatter them forever or bind them in ways no bet could predict. Redemption of the heart. The storm broke with ruthless precision. It began with whispers in the press, speculation that the marriage of Nathan Cross and Victoria Hale was nothing more than a business arrangement. Then came the photographs. Victoria, leaving charity events alone, Nathan buried in meetings without her by his side. Tabloids feasted on the narrative of a crumbling fairy tale, painting her as the betrayed heiress and him as the cold-hearted tycoon who had played her for a fool. For Victoria, each headline was another wound. For Nathan, each article was another reminder of the consequences of his silence. But it wasn't just gossip. Behind the curtain, enemies were stirring. Benjamin Hayes, smug and satisfied, boasted, in private circles, that Nathan had lost the bet. Evelyn, ever the opportunist, used the rumors to convince Charles Hale that the marriage was a stain on the family name. She pushed relentlessly for an annulment, eager to tie Victoria back into the Rothschild contract. She was always too wild, too reckless, Evelyn purred to her husband one evening, her voice dripping with satisfaction. Cross was a mistake. Marcus is stability. We can still salvage her future. Charles, weary from financial pressures and Evelyn's relentless ambition, began to waver. The walls were closing in, and Victoria found herself once more standing on the edge of being used, discarded, and caged. Nathan, however, was not willing to let her go. Not anymore. He had spent weeks watching her light ignite rooms, watching her transform pain into purpose, watching her stand tall against the world's attempts to define her. She was no longer just a rebellious girl nor the pawn in a wager. She had become the one truth he could not ignore. He knew he had broken her trust, that his silence and pride had wounded her deeply, but he also knew that if he did nothing, she would walk away forever, and he would return to a life as hollow as his empire's glass walls. For the first time in his life, Nathan Cross decided that winning wasn't about control, but about surrender. He began quietly. No grand declarations, no empty words. Instead, he poured his efforts into supporting her work, but openly, not from the shadows. At her youth charity center, he appeared one Saturday, sleeves rolled up, personally helping install new equipment, shocking the volunteers who had only ever seen him in boardrooms. At her art exhibition, he bought every piece the children had made, paying them directly, ensuring they saw their worth in tangible ways. Slowly, deliberately, he began showing her not Nathan the businessman, but Nathan the man. Victoria, cautious and wounded, watched with skepticism. She had demanded proof, and he was offering it piece by piece. But trust once shattered does not heal easily. She held her distance, her walls high, refusing to let herself be fooled again. Yet even in her defiance, she couldn't deny the sincerity in his actions, nor the truth in the way his eyes lingered on her when he thought she wasn't looking. The ice in his gaze was melting, and beneath it was something she had never expected. Something raw. Something real. The breaking point came at a gala Evelyn had orchestrated, designed to corner Victoria back into her father's plans. The Rothschilds were in attendance, their smug patriarch practically gloating at the prospect of reclaiming her. Evelyn introduced Victoria to the crowd as if Nathan weren't even in the room, her words dripping with venom disguised as elegance. "It is never too late to correct mistakes," she said pointedly, her hand resting possessively on Victoria's arm. For a moment, Victoria froze, caught between the weight of expectation and the fire of her own will. Then Nathan stepped forward. For years, Nathan Cross had avoided vulnerability, had hidden his heart behind walls of steel. But that night, in front of Manhattan's elite, he broke every rule he had lived by. Taking the microphone from Evelyn's hand with quiet authority, he turned to the room, his voice steady but charged with emotion. "You all know me as a man of numbers, of contracts, of control. But what you don't know is that none of it means anything without her. Yes, I made mistakes. Yes, I was foolish enough to think marriage could be treated as a transaction. But Victoria taught me that life is not about control. It's about courage. And love is the greatest courage of all." The room fell silent. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Paparazzi cameras flashed like storms. Nathan turned to Victoria, his eyes locked on hers. For once, his voice trembled. "This marriage began in a way I'm ashamed of. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as a bet and started seeing you as the only person who makes this life worth living. I don't want 3 months. I don't want appearances. I want forever, with you, if you'll have me." The world seemed to hold its breath. Victoria's chest tightened, her emotions a storm of anger, longing, fear, and hope. She had wanted proof, and here he was, bearing himself in front of the world, surrendering his pride, his image, everything he had once guarded. For a long moment, she said nothing, her silence louder than the applause that threatened to erupt. Then slowly she stepped forward, her voice clear. "You broke my trust, Nathan. You turned me into a game. But you've also shown me that even broken things can be mended. If you truly mean every word, then prove it. Not just today, not just tonight, but every day that follows. Show me love is not just another strategy." Nathan nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I will," he whispered, and for the first time since their strange, cold wedding, he reached for her hand. Not as part of a performance, not as part of a deal, but as a man reaching for the woman he loved. This time, she didn't pull away. The weeks that followed were not a fairy tale, but they were real. Nathan fought for her trust not with grand gestures, but with consistency. He joined her at the shelters, listened when she spoke of her dreams, allowed her to see the scars of his past without hiding. Victoria, in turn, began to lower her own defenses, letting him into the world she had guarded so fiercely. Slowly, painfully, beautifully, they began to rebuild. Not a contract, not a performance, but a partnership. When the 3 months ended, there was no talk of separation, no contracts dissolving. Instead, Nathan invited her to the same rooftop where she had once stood staring at the city like a prisoner. But this time he had transformed it. The rooftop was filled with paintings from her students, lanterns glowing softly against the night sky, a piano waiting under the stars. "This is no bet," he told her, his voice steady. "This is a promise." Then, Before the city that had once doubted them, he dropped to one knee and asked her not for a contract but for her heart. Tears filled her eyes, but they were no longer born of pain. They were the tears of a woman who had finally found a partner, not a prison. She said, yes, not in rebellion, not in desperation, but in love. And when Nathan slipped the ring onto her finger this time, it wasn't cold, expensive glass. It was warm, shining, and real. The world would continue to gossip, to speculate, to dissect their story. But none of it mattered anymore. For Nathan, Cross and Victoria Hale, the bet that had once chained them became the fire that forged them. Their marriage had begun as a gamble, but it ended as a testament that even the coldest hearts can learn to love, that even the most rebellious souls can find peace, and that sometimes the games we play lead us to the truths we were too afraid to face. And so the rebellious girl who said yes to a bet marriage, and the millionaire who never expected what he would find out, discovered the one thing neither of them believed in until it was too late to deny. Love, fierce and unbreakable, built not on appearances but on the courage to be real.